I personally think intelligence is a myth in business. I would love to assume that people at top are intelligent.
You try to lecture me to change that opinion. I will not change my views.
Are you saying that good people usually take bad decisions when they are in a group?
When you're in a group, you will be influenced by group dynamics. 75% of the times, the last person gives the wrong answer. So that's conformity bias. They have huge respect for the CEO. What are the chances of you actually disagreeing and giving your point of view? It's called the halo effect.
Do you think people have the say things to their CEOs?
How many people have the guts to do that? The human brain is not wired to disagree.
It is more dangerous sometimes. Sutapa Banerjee is a behavioral insights expert. A former banker and Harvard fellow, she now serves on the boards of Zomato, Godrej Properties, and Polycab. Today, we decode why we make bad decisions. What do you think is the most interesting thing people do not know about Dipinder Goyal?
For almost 20% of the decisions he hasn't made because he thinks. When you're taking a big decision, you should look at not just the facts of the case, but the emotional state you're in. Most people believe that women are emotional and men are less emotional. Most CEOs are men, which to me is really dangerous, and that's what creates and perpetuates biases.
Even people with good intent take decisions that are catastrophic in nature.
This whole structure, which is just a quarter on quarter and rewarding people, is completely flawed.
If it's a charismatic CEO, the board is saying yes to the CEO. This rise of yes man is actually not helping people take the right decisions. I would like to start a bit with your book. It seems that it's a take from Milton Friedman's theory, the business of business is business. Why did you have to revisit the subject 50 years later?
Even if you have legislation, are people complying by ticking the box? Or are people doing, are businesses doing what is really meaningful? Having said that, the whole idea was, while some may do it because of their ethos or because they genuinely think long term, what could create the compelling motive which would propel businesses in that direction, but which would actually create a compelling motive where it's in the interest of the business to also impact society favorably. The reason is that trillions of dollars flow through businesses. So it was interesting for me to not lecture and tell businesses what they should do, but to figure out what could actually drive them in that direction. The whole behavioral science piece of understanding human behavior and using that also as a means to create change or make change happen. And sometimes it doesn't work in isolation, it's no silver bullet. So the point is, if I have a set opinion about somebody, and you try to lecture me to change that opinion, chances are I will not change my views. I will in fact stick to it even more. And there's a lot of science which actually says that. Because you're putting me with my back to the wall, so I will stick to my views with a greater backlash and vengeance.
What do you think is the most interesting thing people do not know about Dipinder Goyal?
When I joined his board, and I had actually forgotten about it because it was some time ago, we were grappling with a wrong decision that he had made. And apparently I spoke out at length about how, when you're taking a big decision, you should look at not just the facts of the case, but the emotional state you're in. Because whether it's fear, whether it's ego, whether it's conviction, high conviction, whatever it is that's behind that, that will actually shape and to a large degree influence the decision that you're going to make. So it's not the facts on the table, but your emotion which is guiding and making you do that, right? So chances of that decision being rational may or may not be that high. And basis that, he said, after that I've started watching the decisions that I make, and I have kind of, he gave the estimate of almost 20% of the decisions which he would have otherwise made, he hasn't made, because he thinks that the emotion behind that may actually drive the decision rather than the facts of the table.
Do you think that what happened to Nokia or what happened with Boeing could have been avoided? Nokia people, the senior leadership, saw the coming of the iPhone. Engineers inside Boeing had mentioned about, before the tragedy, Boeing 737 MAX engine tragedy happened, people had talked about it, mentioned about it. If this pre-mortem or things like these or dissent would have been legitimized or institutionalized, could we have seen a lot of these collapses not happening?
I can say that, creating an environment, as I said, if you can't rewire the brain, you can rewire the environment, right? And an environment where there is what we call, and then this term has been popularized by an academic called Amy Edmondson. It's called psychological safety, where you feel safe to voice problems that are there. Like you pointed out, I think, in the airline example that you just mentioned, that people said that this is not there, but Correct. They didn't say so because they're yes men, right? They were scared to say it.
They were scared that the leadership will not be comfortable to hear in hearing the truth.
So basically, it's hierarchy, right? Which
Correct.
is bearing down upon you, right?
True.
Which is exactly, the example that I was giving in my merger and acquisition situation also. So you either tone down your view or you don't say it at all, and it can lead to disastrous consequences, right? But the whole idea of psychological safety, again, it's two words, very simple to say. If I say as a CEO or as the chair of the board that, look, I want this space to be psychologically safe, it means nothing. These are two words, right? It means creating that environment where people are indeed safe, which means also that I would like to be criticized myself. I would like people to point out my flaws, which means I would turn around and say that, look, I was taking a wrong decision. It's like the Dipinder Goyal example, right? Where he openly can go to the public and say, Sutapa joined the board at a time where we were grappling with a decision that I made wrong. How many people like saying that they are wrong to start with, right? It means you need to be really comfortable in your skin to be able to say you could be wrong. Right?
Most people aren't.
Most people aren't, right? I mean, there's a gentleman I quote in my workshops called Ray Dalio, who led the largest hedge fund in the world. He's now retired. But at that point of time, I think it was upwards of 150 billion or more. Anyway, so he had this thing called radical transparency, where every decision that they made, whether it was he making it or the trainee making it, would be actually it would get taped. It would actually get there was a digital repository of everything, and you analyzed decisions because a lot of their decisions were very consequential, right? So to figure who is making the decision right, what were the circumstances behind the decisions being right, and what were the circumstances behind the decisions that went wrong, so that you could actually improve. But that means putting yourself, as open. You're laying yourself bare, even though you're the most senior person in an organization, to be sometimes, ridiculed, right? If I'm the head of an organization and I've made 4 out of 5 decisions in the last 1.5 years which are wrong, and it's publicly meaning at least within the organization available, how many people have the guts to do that?
So are you saying that good people usually take bad decisions when they are in a group?
What I am saying is, there are no good or bad people per se, in any way that you define it. It's actually called, to use again a little bit of a parlance in the academic world, it's called the fundamental attribution error, which means we attribute a lot to personality when a lot depends on the situation. So if the situation and the environment is conducive and is safe for me to voice disagreements, I will voice it. In one of the boards that I sit on, we discuss POSH, which is sexual harassment, where in many companies you see there's hardly any which comes out, and you can feel very good that there's none which is there. And in some which are very progressive, a lot come out. And the way to view it is very differently. It's one where it is psychologically so safe that people are more than happy to voice it because they know this will not be encouraged, and people will be terminated, and hence you come up and say it more. So in your example of the airline, if there was an environment which was psychologically safe, where people could point out errors with no consequences on themselves, you would do it, right? So you need to protect. Why would I fear saying something? Because I think the moment I say it, something might happen to me. Maybe I may not be liked. Maybe my appraisal will take gets a poorer
True.
appraisal, right? So you need to protect that person. You need to be able to encourage that. So behaviors you encourage will be behaviors which will be taken.
Decisions become irreversible in nature is because leaders do not like pure honesty. Whether, and there has been this absolute rise of the yes man, where the CXOs are saying yes to the CEOs. The board, if it's a founder or if it's a charismatic CEO, the board is saying yes to the CEO, or the CEO is saying yes to the board. So this rise of yes man is actually not helping people take the right decisions.
See, the whole point is you will always, conformity bias is wired into the brain. The Solomon Asch experiment and the, herd running with the herd examples were to just show you that our brain is meant for shortcuts. Even in that Solomon Asch experiment, there are very interesting corollaries to that experiment. If one person disagrees out of the first 7 that gave the wrong answer, if one person actually did give the right answer, what happens then to that final person? In those instances, the chances of them saying the wrong thing diminishes dramatically, right? Which also shows that if you have a board or a senior leadership team where one person disagrees, the chances of other people also voicing. I've done it myself, right? Because the thing to do is to do all of these things as a job. So you look at pros, you look at cons, and you don't get guided by what each person is saying. So but the point is, it will always be the case. You will always have people, because that's human nature, to want to agree for a variety of reasons which I just now mentioned.
Right.
Social dominance, hierarchy, who's charismatic, the halo effect, all of those biases will be there in your brain. You need to have interventions like Premortem, depending on what the size of the decision is, to be able to overcome it.
Boards are usually a place of retired old men today, right?
Absolutely not. So I have a huge disagreement, but here it's anecdotal evidence, right? I'm not
Most
talking
of the
about
boards
that.
you see around you.
So all of the boards that I'm in are not. So it's an example, right?
Yeah.
But I'm not talking here only boards, nor is my book sort of focused on boards. I'm talking here about senior leadership teams. You have startup world, you have a lot of worlds, right? But again, if you have people, an entrepreneur who only likes entrepreneur, a CEO who only likes CEO, which is the natural thing, right? A lawyer who only likes lawyers. The point is to have, for good decisions in any organizational context, you need to have people who are unlike you, who don't fit into that.
People try to brush things under the carpet because they think that when the markets change, or there will always be an opportunity to improve things or rectify things in this swift moving market.
No, see, the way here I look at it is, I'm
trying to understand decision making at that level,
but the way I would look at it here, Sunny, is what you're sort of driving here is incentives. If you're incentivized for, like we spoke about earlier, quarter-on-quarter profits,
Correct.
or people here
Correct.
are that you're so strongly focused on sales that you
Correct.
have to drive this, and I actually believe that sometimes overt pressure, which is completely not realistic, can actually drive unethical behavior.
So you're talking about badly designed systems.
Of course. So you need to, everywhere what I'm talking about is the human brain and the way we are, our behavior. There is no intrinsically good person or bad person. Or at least, we're not talking outliers here. In the normal population, in a statistical graph, in the normal population, people are driven by the situation, the environment and the situation. The environment here is made up of something called a set of incentives. And if that incentives push you to behaving in a particular way, that's the way that person is going to behave. So you need to change. So when you say systems, I mean, yes, what are the elements of that system? I've talked about various elements of the system. Incentives is one large key element of the system, which is driving behavior in a particular way. So in any case, I'm a huge believer that, this whole structure, which is just a quarter on quarter and rewarding people, is completely flawed. It needs to be longer term, because you're not rewarding skill, you're rewarding luck.
I wanted to understand the relationship between success and intelligence. I think that success clearly, so most successful companies are eventually become less intelligent because the success starts becoming the main reason why you do things. Case in point, Hindustan Motors in the 1960s, 1970s, they had got close to about 70% market share. If you look at Nokia at its peak, it had got 50% market share. Even Yahoo in the internet era had got almost had a dominant market share. And they were so successful. It's not that they had less intelligent people on their board, in their leadership, but they failed to take the right decisions eventually. And does success kill intelligence? And what have you seen in boards that you have been with, and when you study companies, when you teach people?
No, so again, I will not go here with anecdotal evidence, because my experience is finally a finite set of people, and it's too small basis which one to extrapolate, and those are then making those leaps which are, I don't think, correct to even make, because you have a small sample bias, which is not the right thing to do. What I would sort of pick up as a thread from your question is not so much between success and intelligence, but what happens is when a company grows big from a small hungry entity, there are a lot of changes which happen in that company, right? From hierarchy to lots of different kinds of people, etc. So, there's this whole classic debate of how can I grow big but still remain small in certain attributes, where I'm still agile, I'm still able to think differently, I'm still able to innovate.
What does fear have to do within all of these? So people are somewhere afraid to take decisions, somewhere afraid to make that spending on innovation, experimentation. Especially if you take leaders today, I think that still entrepreneurs, promoters are in an advantageous position to make those choices, but a CEO, a CXO level person, they hardly have that choice today to make experiments or even to allocate that kind of capital for those experiments.
So it again depends on the company and what you're aiming to be.
Is
and
it
what you're
culture?
trying to be. So to me, if you want to have, it depends, as I said, it depends on what kind of experiments we're talking about and what life stage the company is in. So it's very difficult to actually generalize. But what I keep saying is people will be in that situation what the situation demands of them, right? So if your incentives are perverse, if the incentive is actually going to penalize you for an experiment gone wrong, I will not take that experiment. But if you feel that a certain number of experiments are absolutely critical and you will not be penalized if they go wrong, because you will have situations where they go wrong, right? So it depends on what kind of experiments are these, and if the company has the wherewithal and the wallet strength to be able to encourage them, then you need not have perverse incentives which penalizes people. Ultimately, people will do what is in their best interest to promote themselves, to not be in a situation where they will be suddenly deprived of either their job or their incentive or their, whatever, monies, whatever. So you want to protect that, right? As long as you create that environment around them, they will be allowed to do that. It could be a calibrated decision which is, maybe that I am a market share lead. I lead the market in this area, and this is my business as usual, and I will keep this going as running to clockwork as the way it is, with some incremental improvements. But I will have 3 other
Small
businesses
pockets.
which I want them to grow, because this might get disrupted at some time. I don't know how. I'm unable to visualize, but let me check out the market and let me have some of those disruptions playing out within my own setup, right? And there are many ways to do it. The red team, blue team, right? I mean, I'm in a very comfortable position. But I want to find out. So within my own team, and some of the younger team members are the best, in the employee base to do it. Figure how you can hack me, how you can sort of, disrupt my business. Go all out and do it, and have another team which goes all out to protect yourself from that.
True.
Right? So there are a lot of these kind of tools which are available, which if organizations are open to it, you can do, and you can actually implement, use, and do. I mean, a lot of the stuff which is happening, say, for cybersecurity, can happen in the organizational context overall. You're hacking something. You're doing ethical hacking. To be able to better it.
Your digital.
Imagine doing it for your products. Imagine doing it for, the market share that you have, right? You can do it if you want.
While there are more men on boards, while there are more men CEOs, while there are more men promoters and owners, there would have been a reversal, and things would have been different if more women were heading companies and more women were part of boards. And do you think that there would have been a change in situation?
So again, I wouldn't know. These are hypothetical scenarios, right? There's been because it has never happened in history.
No, because you wrote that women are more risk-taking, women are more open, they're also emotional beings from my sense. And practicality is also something that they perhaps would combine with emotion, and they are not unidimensional in nature. So all of this put together then?
So I have actually written in my chapter exactly the opposite. Okay, so let me take you through that a little bit, because I started by saying that some of behavioral insights is intuitive and some of it is counterintuitive. Right?
Okay.
So this is the opposite of what you said. So most people believe that women are emotional and men are less emotional. Okay, so let me take you through a little bit of the chapter which I wrote. So there is a acronym, which is one of my favorite acronyms. So even from this, podcast, if your viewers take away 2 things, I would love them to take away conformity bias and how to prevent it by cognitive diversity and Premortem. And the second would be this acronym. So the acronym was coined by a Nobel Prize winner, Daniel Kahneman. I use a lot of his work in my workshops. Daniel Kahneman was a renowned psychologist who won the Nobel Prize for Economics in 2002, which itself is a telling point. It meant it took somebody from a silo of psychology to overturn the fundamental tenet on which classical economics, which I studied and most people studied, have been built, and overturn it completely. And that was basically that all of classical economics believe that the decisions we take are rational, are logically coherent. And he said, and in psychology it was long known that it never is. It's influenced by a whole bunch of things, including my mood, the traffic which I came in today, the rains, as you spoke about, the meal that I had, right? And another Nobel Prize winning economist, Richard Thaler, calls it supposedly irrelevant factors, SIFs, he calls it. Small, seemingly irrelevant factors, not supposedly, seemingly irrelevant factors, which actually have huge impact on the decisions that we take. Right, so where were we? What were we talking about when I came to this? Yeah, so the acronym that Daniel Kahneman coined is called WYSIATI, which is WYSIATI. What you see is all there is. So it means that my world is formed by what I've seen in front of me. So if I've seen my mother work, I think that, women work. If I've seen her stay at home and do housework, I assume that the man goes out to work and women don't. Of course, it gets shaped by various other things I see along the way, but my world is largely from the cues I take from what I see all around me, right? So that's the description of the world. In other words, if I see that most of the nurses are women, I will assume, that's the world. Most of the primary school teachers are women, that's the world. CEOs, fighter pilots, are men.
Correct.
So that's it. Now, the brain also keeps taking leaps, and it takes this very important leap when it sees this. It also makes an assumption, and which I think is also the assumption that you made, which is that, so nurses are women, most nurses tend to be women, and most primary school teachers tend to be women. It must be because they are nurturers by nature. Most CEOs are men, most pilots are men. So it must be that there is an element of decisiveness and risk-taking that comes in both of these, which are suited to men, and that's why. So from what is, it becomes what should be. Nurses are women, we see that what is becomes what should be. It must be, they should be nurses should be women because they're good at it. So what is becomes what should be, which to me is really dangerous, and that's what creates and perpetuates biases. So coming now back to what I wrote in that article, so it's again based completely on empirical evidence, nothing to do with what I think. So there's a gentleman who was a derivatives trader in Wall Street called John Coates. And he observed, and so did I in my banking entire, sort of years in banking, that in the trading desks, it's largely men. In fact, in my entire career, I've seen only one woman who was a currency trader who was a woman. And in this instance, of course, John Coates also found very, very few women, and mostly men, and mostly younger men. Mm-hmm. That was his observation. I think he was Deutsche Bank, Goldman Sachs, he observed that. And then he, that was there in his mind. He came back to UK and he teamed up with neuroscientists at Cambridge. And he analyzed the saliva of the men who were at the trading desks. And he found an amazing correlation. And again, as I said, none of the studies quoted in this book are anything which is cutting edge, which means it's just being researched as we speak. These are longitudinal, large studies. So this has been a decade-long study which has been done. So the chances of it not being correct is very, very minuscule, right? And what he found was that the amount of testosterone, obviously in younger men, is far higher, right? So one of the things he'd observed, and which is something actually even from as outsiders we would see, is with uncanny regularity, in spite of the risk management practices which presumably all large banks have, you will have one trader going rogue. We call it a rogue trader, and resulting in either bankruptcy or a bank losing millions and millions of dollars, right? And typically in the trading room. With uncanny regularity, every 5 or 7 years we'll have one such bank and a trader, right? And this was his observation. He found, using these neuroscientists, that the testosterone was higher. And he also found, which has been proven across other species as well, it's called the winner effect. Sometimes called the winner's effect or the winner effect, which is if you were to do the same thing repeatedly for gains, for short-term gains, right? But you repeat it, what happens? And he finds that when it comes to younger men and they're taking, which is what happens in the dealing room, right? In currency trading or any trading, you keep taking bets again and again. Now what happens is sometimes when those bets are going right, you are so goaded by hormones that you go on taking bigger and bigger bets. Okay, so unlike what we think, a rational decision means it's calibrated, it's measured, you're not impacted by emotion. Emotion plays a significant role. And to his surprise, he found there were fewer numbers, but if there were women or older men where the testosterone is lower, right, they are immune to the effect. So it works both ways. For men, when you're winning, you take larger and larger bets thinking you will win, and you have a whole lot of younger men also in the dealing room who are goading you, go on. Yeah, and you can apply that to many other spheres of life, including some not so good ones. And when you're losing, again the reverse happens. Your enthusiasm gets more and more dampened, and you sort of stop taking risks. Women and older men are immune to that effect, right? So while my book is not prescriptive, John Coates makes a very clear prescription. He says, one of the things that ought to happen, because this is a longitudinal study and it's stretched over 10 years, is please have more women and older men in the dealing rooms of currency trading desks. And this is one where, living up to popular myths, that men are more decisive and women are more emotional. So I sort of, as I said, it's exactly the opposite of what you said. What you show here, what this study shows is that men are way more driven by emotion than women. Women are actually way better risk takers because they are immune to this effect.
If you look at the debt of Kingfisher Airlines, if you look at the corporate governance problems of Yes Bank, the regulators kept on pointing it out. The debt did not pile overnight. Satyam scam, the siphoning of money, it didn't happen. And they all had very good people sitting on their boards. They had the right CEOs, so on and so forth. Just because you were living in the now, and the now was so praising from the world outside, you forget to look at the what ifs. And is that why a lot of businesses collapse?
So, what you said here and the examples you gave, one of the things, again, I spoke of conformity bias, I spoke of likeness bias. The other one, which is pervasive, is an overconfidence bias or an optimism bias. Again, that's the way we are, human beings, unfortunately, are made. That's why we survive, that's how we live, that's how we are made, right? Then the particularly successful people are more prone to it because they have been successful in the past. So if you've got an aura of being a great leader, because you have built something great in the past, right? If you have, and you have been feted and recognized for it, right? Your default filter is always going to be that what I do next is also going to be successful. I can't fail, right? There are a lot of people like that, right? This you would have encountered. I certainly have encountered people like that, where even if this, now the point is, and this is where I sometimes actually openly say it, and I was once, speaking at a forum, and somebody actually very, very senior said that, made a very provocative statement, and I actually used the word that experience and success is not, we can't use that as a substitute for skill.
Experience and success cannot be used as a substitute for skill.
Past success and years of experience are not a substitute for skill. Yeah. So basically,
can you explain that?
Yeah. So, just because I have many years of experience does not necessarily mean, right, that I will do what I am now expected to do in my role very well. And that will obviously upset a lot of people because you take seniority to go to the top, right? But the whole point is your successes have been achieved at a particular point in time, in a particular set of circumstances, right? Market cycles move very swiftly. Markets change very quickly. The situation that you're in may be completely different from the one that you've been successful in, right? But our filters are, particularly if we've been really successful, is that I would use what I've used in the past also now. Now, the reason why you have a board and why you have independent directors, apart from everything about protecting minority shareholders, but also is that you want people who think, who are people who are unlike you, who think differently.
But at the core of everything that we do are people. And I believe that people usually have good intentions. But seeing a lot of things in the past few years, even people with good intent take catastrophic decisions or take decisions that are catastrophic in nature. Classic examples of some of the largest companies, whether it's Kodak, Nokia, but let's stick to Kodak for an example. Perhaps they invented the digital camera in 1975, and the writing was on the wall that digital photography would be big, but they continued to serve the film business, which was at that point of time more profitable. The same problem was faced by Fuji Films, but Fuji Films moved into healthcare, cosmetics, advanced materials. One adapted, the other one didn't. Why? So, do you think that companies, CEOs, owners usually take emotional decisions of what because of the longevity that they have been serving?
So I'll tell you how I think about what you just said, and without going into Kodak or Fuji films, but just taking what you quoted here, right? I mean, there could have been many other reasons which went into this, but prima facie, one of the things which comes again from the literature of this subject that I keep talking about is a term, and I don't normally use any jargon unless it explains something really well. So this one I'm going to use it because it just captures the essence of the idea just in the two words. So this is called the sunk cost fallacy, right?
Sunk cost fallacy.
Okay. So cost that have already sunk in, right? It could be in terms of an idea, it could be in terms of a large investment, it could be in terms of putting a lot of money behind it and building a large business, right? So in this instance, if you talked about Kodak, it meant that they would have to do something which would cannibalize their own business.
And that brings me to my next point, which is, I personally think intelligence is a myth in business. And my reason for this are two examples that I tell the story with always. I would love to assume that people at top are intelligent people, but even after that, companies like ILNFS, which had one of the most distinguished board of former bureaucrats, bankers, and even companies like long-term management in the US, which had Nobel laureates as part of their board, but it had a catastrophic end, both of them. Does it tell something about people overestimating intelligence and underestimating the right judgment at the right time?
So Sani, again, I would look at this question a little differently. So the way I would actually look at it, and let me give you an example which is an even more recent example. So the NSE example, right? The National Stock Exchange, which made headlines, right? So let me take a part of that because, in social gathering, this is something I was asked for a while, a lot of friends, because they know I sit on boards, which is that, so again, without getting into the details, because I kind of forget names and all of that, there was this one person who became, I think, the COO, who had no qualifications, right? And who had absolutely no qualifications, but who became the COO, right? And the question became, this was in NSE, right? And this was sort of obviously made headlines in newspapers, so everybody knew about it. So during that time, anywhere you go, that was the top of the mind kind of question. And again, NSE, exactly like you said, had some of the best people who were on the board, right? And these are people who continue to do exceptionally well in what they are doing today, right? I don't find it remotely surprising that it happened. And the reason why I say that, and I sometimes use this example in my talks on corporate governance, is the fact that if you have a really charismatic CEO, which is what they had, NSE, at that point of time, who was also getting the best CEO awards, who had actually built that organization, was doing exceptionally well. You see the person in the newspapers all the time, cutting ribbons, and generally being a very charismatic, great leader. And then that person actually says, and I'm not very sure if this is exactly the way it happened, but I'm, even if I'm taking sort of some poetic license here, bear with me. If that person were to say that, look, and I think this is factually borne out, that I have got this person who's been working with me on a consulting role, as a consultant,
right.
And that person has really done extremely well. And it was actually almost in the last couple of years doing the COO role without the label. Right? And now I just want to give that person the role that the person had already been doing.
Okay.
Right? Now, if it's a very charismatic leader who's very successful in building the organization and frames it in that manner, and you have one or two people agreeing to that, right? Agreeing to what she said, what is the chance that others would disagree, is my point. Right? And I'll give you examples so that you actually understand how deeply wired this is in our brains. I'll give you two examples. The first example is it's an experiment which is a very feted, well-known experiment in psychology. It's called the Solomon Asch experiment. And the experiment is very simple. And it's an experiment worth Googling for everybody to know in detail, but I'm going to give you just a quick snapshot of it. So basically you have a card, right? And the card has a line of a particular height. Let's, for example, here say that it's 12 inches or 18 inches, right? And you have two others. One which is much smaller, say only 2 inches, and the other which is much bigger, say 3 feet, right? So it's like dramatically different heights, right? I don't know the exact heights there, but it's visually very clear what the heights are, right? And then, so you have one card having just one and another having these three. And the experiment is simple. You're asking people, so this one in this single card corresponds to which height here? Right? So if you have 2 inches and 6 inches and 10 inches, you visually are very clear which one it corresponds to. If this is 6, you will say it corresponds to the 6, not to the 3 and not to the 9, right? Now, the way the experiment was conducted, you had about, again, the exact numbers, I'm not 100% sure, but around 7 to 8 people. And the first 6 were all stooges of the experimenter. So my people are sitting and deliberately giving the wrong answer. The 7th person is the actual person who's been brought in from outside, who is in that sense the lab rat, the person who is actually the... And it's astonishing, I think 75% of the times, the last person gives the wrong answer. Now, you're disbelieving your own eyes, which means basically what happens is when you see 7 people giving the same answer, on an average it comes down, I think 38 or 40%, but the same thing is repeated again and again, right? But at least 1 out of the number of times it's repeated, in 75% of the cases, the actual person, not the stooges, but the actual person who's always stationed right at the end to give the answer, gives the wrong answer. And here you're disbelieving your own eyes. We always say, right, we believe what we see. You're disbelieving what you actually see because that's basically a way to show you what conformity bias is. We like to conform. If 7 people are saying this, there must be something wrong that I'm seeing. You distrust almost your own eyes, right?
True.
So that's conformity bias. The other simple way of looking at it is, another example which I often cite is, if I was just walking out here and I'm supposed to go in a particular direction, and I find all of the people from that running in the opposite direction.
Right.
I will instinctively, reflexively, without thinking, run with them, right? And not go the direction I was going. I'm not waiting to rationalize. I'm not waiting to find a rational reason. Is there a fire? Is there violence? What's happening? I'm just running with the herd. That's called our herding instinct. That's conformity bias at its most basic. And it's that same conformity bias, same brain with the same conformity bias, which walks into a boardroom to take a decision on investment, on a key hire, on getting into a new market, consequential, sometimes not reversible decisions with consequences, or a senior leadership team. Imagine in a boardroom environment of an NSE, these are mostly people who know each other. They've been on the board. They have mutual respect for each other. They have huge respect for the CEO, who's obviously a really feted person. And then you have a couple of people who've agreed, right? What are the chances of you actually disagreeing and giving your point of view? It's called the halo effect. The halo effect is somebody really charismatic, and then a chair of the board, or whoever is the first person or second person, who are equally sort of important and sort of celebrated, saying yes. Chances of you disagreeing is very low. You toe the line. Right? So shouting from the rooftops and saying, I've got 4 independent directors and they must give their point of view, or in a senior leadership discussion, we are open-minded and everybody must give their own point of view, is easy to say. It doesn't happen. The human brain is not wired to disagree.
Well, the question right in front of me is, can boards stop disasters to happen, given the fact that there is conformity bias, given the fact that there is a charismatic CEO or a founder at the top of it, whether we take the case of WeWork, Theranos, even Satyam for that matter, or those multitude of disasters, corporate disasters India and the world has seen, should every board have somebody who just disagrees, whose job is to disagree?
So I don't know whether you'll be able to firstly find such a person or whether how practical that suggestion is, but I get the point where you're coming from.
Because otherwise, how do you?
So let me talk about a couple of techniques. What's wired in our brain will always remain wired that way. What you need to hence do when you come into a boardroom or a senior leadership decision-making setup is what I say is if you can't rewire the brain, what you can rewire is the environment around you, right?
Okay.
And let's take this example. And it could be boardroom, it could be a senior leadership team, whatever, right? There are two things which can help. There are more than two, but I'm just talking about two key things for paucity of time. One is it's extremely important that you have a diverse set of people, right? The science behind it is that if you have a diverse set of people and they voice their views independently, so it's two things. One is to have...
Can you define diversity as in...
So diversity does not necessarily mean only like men and women, because that's only identity diversity. That plays a role, but that's not the only thing. By diversity here, I'm talking about cognitive diversity, people who think differently. And that thinking differently comes from different walks of life. So a lawyer will think very differently from a marketing person to a salesperson to an academic to a politician to a doctor. They will each look at the same problem differently. There are many techniques. I'm giving you one of the most interesting techniques, and the technique doesn't come from me. There are Nobel Prize winners who've actually worked and got this technique out. This is a technique which has been discussed in the World Economic Forum, but I'll still share it because it's still so little known. So this technique is called Premortem, right? So postmortem is when, you know what postmortem is. A person has died and then you're doing a postmortem. So Premortem is, let's say you're taking a decision. Let's say the decision is of hiring a new CEO, or the decision is of going into doing an acquisition, right? Now, when you're taking that decision, when you look at, even though you're a diverse set of people and you've got a dossier looking at, say, the pros and cons of either that person or the pros and cons of going in for that acquisition, chances are that it's the founder or the CEO who's come in, who's making the presentation. From the body language, it's crystal clear that they want that an affirmative answer is what is being looked at, right?
Correct.
So chances of any person disagreeing is already reduced. So premortem means you then tell people, so say people tone down their views or whatever, and you want to go ahead with it. How do you ensure, like you said, that people toe the line, and in all of this, how will we get the actual independent views of people, right? How do you get it? That's the big question. Shouting from the rooftops is not going to get you that. So one of the ways to actually get it is to say that, assume that we've taken this decision, we've gone in for this acquisition, and we find, say, 2 years later, it did not work out, okay? The same set of data is on our table, the same dossier with pros and cons is on our table. Look at it again and say, what can go wrong? As an exercise, okay? So I'm assuming that I'm going ahead with this acquisition, but it's not worked out. I'm looking at the same data, nothing different, nothing new, but I'm now looking at it with a different frame, right? And that frame is what can go wrong. I now look at it, the same data, differently. I'm thinking the opposite of what I thought. Now, what that does, it legitimizes disagreement. It legitimizes dissent. Like you were saying, that have a person who's only disagreeing. You don't need to do that. You have a technique where you give everybody, even the person who agreed, you're making that person, forcing that person to think the opposite. It's also called thinking the opposite of what you first thought.
It's very tough to get there.
You're asking people to do it. You're legitimizing dissent. So I am the chair of the board. I am saying that assume, that's the technique of premortem. You assume that we are going ahead, but it has failed. Why would it have failed? Go through the same data and point it. Obviously, you can figure out now because you've been given the frame to now figure. So in one of a person I met.
That can only happen if the CEO himself has to come up with 10 reasons why this will fail.
No, the CEO is actually now asking everybody. So what you're missing, the most...
No, it's in the world of yes men, this won't work.
No. You are now asking. You are asking that I want views. And he himself may start out by giving 1 or 2 or 3. The chair of the board may give one or two. Yes, this can go wrong. We always do that. In every board, I mean, it's a given.
How many times?
No, let me just
Sure.
explain this whole technique to you. It's one of the most powerful techniques that has been thought of. Let me also give you an aside. One of the biggest industrialists who came to World Economic Forum, and he heard it being discussed, and there was a Nobel Prize winner and somebody else who discussed it, and he actually turned around to somebody and said, my coming to the WEF this time is justified by just having learnt Premortem. It's one of the most powerful techniques that you can have. So basically what you're doing is legitimizing dissent. You're asking people to come up with what can go wrong. Now you may still go ahead with that decision. You may still go ahead with that acquisition, but what it performs is a phenomenally useful role. And that role is you now know what can go wrong. You build plan A, plan B, plan C to guard against what could go wrong.
Is it a more technical version of what you would call critical thinking?
I mean, to me, those are all fuzzy words, right? Those are all fuzzy words. Here, what you're doing is, this is one of the most powerful ways of legitimizing dissent. It's one of the most powerful ways. So somebody who had a different point of view now comes forward and gives that point of view. Somebody who had the same view as maybe the founder and it was pro the acquisition, now is forced to think differently. There are many reasons why it's fantastic, and I'm fascinated by this one, because the first filter that comes from your head, which is the default filter, is always what has worked for you in the past. So somebody in the room, and people always love giving anecdotal evidence, which is of, anecdotal evidence is of no use, but they love giving it because as human beings, we love stories and what has happened to us. And we had this experience last time and we did this and this was why it went right or whatever. So what it forces you to do is to not use that default filter, but think the opposite of what you intuitively thought by looking at the data.
Right. So my theory or my understanding of what we talked about is that most people, decisions become irreversible in nature is because leaders do not like pure honesty. Whether and there has been this absolute rise of the yes man, where the CXOs are saying yes to the CEOs. The board, if it's a founder or if it's a charismatic CEO, the board is saying yes to the CEO, or the CEO is saying yes to the board. So this rise of yes man is actually not helping people take the right decisions.
See, the whole point is, you will always, conformity bias is wired into the brain. The Solomon Asch experiment and the, herd running with the herd examples were to just show you that our brain is meant for shortcuts. Even in that Solomon Asch experiment, there are very interesting corollaries to that experiment. If one person disagrees, out of the first 7 that gave the wrong answer, if one person actually did give the right answer, what happens then to that final person? In those instances, the chances of them saying the wrong thing diminishes dramatically, right? Which also shows that if you have a board or a senior leadership team where one person disagrees, the chances of other people also voicing. I've done it myself, right? Because the thing to do is to do all of these things as a job. So you look at pros, you look at cons, and you don't get guided by what each person is saying. So but the point is, it will always be the case. You will always have people, because that's human nature, to want to agree for a variety of reasons which I just now mentioned. Right. Social dominance, hierarchy, who's charismatic, the halo effect, all of those biases will be there in your brain. You need to have interventions like Premortem, depending on what the size of the decision is, to be able to overcome it.
Boards are usually a place of retired old men today, right?
Absolutely not. So I have a huge disagreement, but here it's anecdotal evidence, right? I'm not
Most
talking
of the
about
boards you see around you.
So all of the boards that I'm in are not. So it's an example, right?
Yeah.
But I'm not talking here only boards, nor is my book sort of focused on boards. I'm talking here about senior leadership teams. You have startup world, you have a lot of worlds, right? But again, if you have people, an entrepreneur who only likes entrepreneur, a CEO who only likes CEO, which is the natural thing, right? A lawyer who only likes lawyers. The point is to have, for good decisions in any organizational context, you need to have people who are unlike you, who don't fit into that.
Great.
You still have questions?
this can go on, but yeah, thank you so much, Sutapa, for coming over. And I think that this conversation has perhaps been one of the most insightful conversations that I have had on the second act.